Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We are about to unpack a really profound, incredibly high-stakes shift in global diplomacy that's happening right under our noses. Fearing a highly volatile and transactional U.S. leadership, Taiwan is seriously reconsidering its entire survival strategy. They're actually looking at ways to use massive economic leverage to secure American security commitments. So let's dive right into Taiwan's geopolitical gamble.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap our heads around this new era of diplomacy, we kind of have to look at a revised interpretation of an old Ronald Reagan maxim. If you can't make someone see the light, let them feel the heat. All over the world, America's security partners are reaching a rather bleak conclusion. Basically, to earn respect from a transactional U.S. president, you have to show that you actually have the power to hurt them. Now, nobody is foolish enough to threaten a U.S. president openly, of course, but allies are absolutely learning that securing a firm commitment requires tangible, undeniable leverage.
And this brings us to Section 1, the transactional diplomacy shift, or how allies learn to bully. To see where they're getting this idea, you really don't need to look any further than the Strait of Hormuz. Global allies watched Iran successfully gain massive leverage over much stronger adversaries simply by threatening to close that vital choke point. In Taiwan, an island of 24 million people claimed by China, well, they've been quietly taking notes. You see, Taiwan's survival as a self-ruled democracy relies pretty much entirely on decisions made by the American president. There is no formal defense treaty binding America to defend Taiwan. Instead, successive presidents have relied on strategic ambiguity, basically leaving open the possibility that they might send in the Seventh Fleet to deter a Chinese attack. But for a nation of 24 million people, ambiguity is a terrifying foundation for survival. And this fear is really compounded by highly volatile rhetoric. For instance, Donald Trump's approach has genuinely frightened officials in Taipei. While he did sell the island record-breaking quantities of weaponry during his term, he's also publicly mocked Taiwan as a tiny place entirely outgunned by China. After meeting with China's leader, Xi Jinping, he echoed Chinese talking points and virtually accused Taiwan's president of provoking China. He's openly complained about the prospect of traveling 9,500 miles just to fight a war, and he essentially treats future arms sales to Taiwan as a mere bargaining chip for U.S. trade negotiations. For Taiwanese officials, this kind of rhetoric urgently signals that their old playbook just isn't going to cut anymore. Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, Taiwan's old survival playbook, and the pivot from values to leverage. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast in Taiwan's diplomatic evolution. 30 years ago, when Taiwan fully embraced democracy, its strategy was to win friends in Washington by heavily emphasizing its status as a bastion of liberty menaced by an autocratic China. But when faced with a highly transactional U.S. administration, they quickly learned to downplay the talk of shared values. I mean, they watched in absolute horror when Donald Trump scorned Ukraine as a small country foolishly trying to defend itself against a larger Russia. Taiwanese officials shuddered, realizing, hey, that could easily be us. So the new strategy discards the emotional appeal and leans entirely into strategic leverage. So what does that leverage actually look like? Well, Taiwan relies on two primary arguments. The first is geographic. Taiwan is located dead center in what the Pentagon calls the first island chain. This is the strategic archipelago running from Japan straight through Taiwan and down to the Philippines, which essentially hems in mainland China. It's an absolutely vital geographic barrier for U.S. military strategy in the Pacific. But geography alone isn't enough to secure a guarantee. That requires Section 3, weaponizing the silicon shield, moving from defense to offense. You've likely heard of the silicon shield. This refers to Taiwan's indispensable semiconductor chip industry. For years, Taiwanese politicians have viewed this industry as literally a sacred mountain. The logic was always defensive, right? As long as Taiwan produces the chips the whole world relies on, it makes the island too valuable for China to attack and entirely too valuable for America to ever abandon. It was the ultimate defensive deterrent. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer scale of that monopoly. Taiwan produces around 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. 90%. If you are holding 90% of the cards that make global technology, smartphones, and artificial intelligence actually function, you instantly possess massive global leverage. But, and this is a big but, as policy experts in Taipei are realizing, the shield has critical vulnerabilities. Taiwan is highly earthquake-prone and typhoon-lashed. Worse, it relies almost completely on imported energy and raw materials to keep those massive chip factories running. Furthermore, friendly governments, who are understandably tired of relying on such a vulnerable island, are heavily pressing Taiwan to build foundries overseas. Donald Trump, for instance, charged Taiwan with stealing America's chip industry and browbeat major companies like TSMC into expanding operations into Arizona and Texas. For Taiwan, deploying their most talented engineers overseas actively weakens their domestic silicon shield. So, if the defensive shield is cracking, what exactly is the alternative? Well, quietly, behind closed doors in Taipei, a drastic solution is being discussed. They are talking about taking the 160-kilometer Taiwan Strait and turning it into a global choke point. Instead of just protecting themselves, they're realizing their indispensable role in global commerce can be used as an active weapon to coerce both America and China simultaneously. Let's move to how this builds into a very real crisis chain reaction. Imagine China initiates a naval blockade, stopping vital energy imports like coal, gas, and oil from reaching Taiwan. Within hours, electricity runs terribly short. Now, chipmaking requires an absolutely massive amount of power, so the Taiwanese government naturally prioritizes energy for hospitals and civilian services over the chip foundries. This provides Taiwan with a perfectly moral, undeniable argument to stop exporting chips entirely. The global market is instantly thrown into chaos. By doing this, Taiwan is effectively holding the world economy hostage to force an intervention. So the crucial point is analyzing the final stakes of this hostage strategy, which brings us to Section 4, the geopolitical AI gamble, the ultimate high-stakes bet. If Taiwan pulls the trigger on this choke point during a crisis, there are really two potential outcomes. The pessimist view imagines a highly transactional U.S. president simply ordering Taiwan to surrender, negotiating directly with China, leaving Taiwan completely excluded from the talks, and effectively abandoning their democracy. But the optimist view points out a glaring flaw in that pessimist scenario. If America sells out Taiwan, they hand China complete, undisputed control over the world's most important chipmakers. And how on earth could that ever be compatible with America's desperate quest for global AI dominance? Which leaves us with this massive, world-altering question to ponder. If a crisis hits and the chips stop flowing, will America simply step aside and allow China to control the very foundation of the world's AI dominance? Or will it be forced to step in and defend Taiwan? It is a terrifyingly dangerous game of chicken, one that shows just how fragile our global alliances have become when allies feel the only way to secure protection is to hold the global economy hostage. It's a fundamental shift in how the world operates and absolutely something we all need to watch closely. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this helped illuminate the incredible stakes at play here.